wanted to offer our appreciation for everyone coming together in such late notice. This is a very exciting talk on the topic of generative AI and fiqh and Islamic jurisprudence. So I want to do a quick introduction. Of course, we all know Sheikh Hasib, and the brother next to Sheikh Hasib is Dr. Mohammad Ansari. He is a senior machine learning scientist from Amazon.com. So he is on the retail side. Been working with them for several years in the areas of machine and deep learning. And Dr. Ansari holds a PhD in computer science from what he describes the nicest city in the US, Madison, Wisconsin. So we're very thankful to have both of them here, and inshallah I'll turn it over to them. The talk will go until Isha, so 9:15. And I believe if people are willing to stay, we can have an additional Q&A session after Isha. But let's see how the time goes, and let me turn it over. Jazakallahukhairan.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I want to talk a little bit today about artificial intelligence and how it's becoming ubiquitous in our lives, and both the opportunities and challenges that we face as a community. We're not going to get really deep into any of them, but I want to get us thinking about them and hopefully inspire some of us to develop expertise and contribute to the field itself, inshallah. So before we get a little bit deeper, I want to talk about, or I want to discuss what it is that we're talking about. So when we talk about AI, artificial intelligence, we're talking about computer systems that perform cognitive tasks, I'll explain what these are, that we normally associate with human beings. So we're talking about things like perception, like listening and hearing and sensing. And we're talking about reasoning capabilities, things like comprehension, planning, problem solving. And then finally, we're talking about learning. And by learning, what I mean is that the system improves in the performance of some task based on feedback. So these are capabilities that we associate with human beings, but when we see a computer system performing these, to some degree, we call that an artificially intelligent system. Now, AI is already pervasive in our lives. The way that pricing is determined for the things that we buy. The way that your personalized search engines know exactly what you're looking for with just a few keywords. The way that we talk to customer service. The way that even prison sentences are recommended in some counties. The way that a company decides if they want to interview you, or the way that they decide if they want to give you a free trial for a product because they think at the end you're going to buy it. The way that fraudulent transactions are flagged. Your Amazon recommendations, your Uber driver match. Your life is very likely touched by dozens and dozens of AI models already every day. And yet, there's a revolution that's been happening on the research side. And it kind of came to the forefront of public consciousness about 1.5 years ago when ChatGPT was released, when it got really huge. And we went beyond things like prediction to generation. We went to generating text and pictures and videos. We've all seen some really impressive examples, and I'll go through some of them just to refresh our memories. We're able to generate stories, summarize documents, and even write and debug computer code. People have used it to write entire khutbahs. And I'll get into why that might be a little bit problematic later. ChatGPT was able to pass the final exam of an MBA course at a very reputable university. It placed in the top 10% of the bar exam. It'll proofread your resume and your essay. It'll even write your essay for you. It'll generate recipes for you. So AI has been around, it's been helping us improve the quality of our lives, but generative AI specifically is a step function change. And what I mean by that is that it's a kind of disruptor. It's shaking the way we do things. It enables a vast medley of things that we could not do before. And so I want to get into a little bit about how this will shake things up, inshallah. So very briefly, excuse me, what can ChatGPT do? I was talking with somebody the other day, and we were talking about why Allah might have forbidden riba. Now we believe as Muslims that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbids something for us, it is not just because He wants to or because He can, but because that thing is intrinsically harmful for us as individuals, as families, as communities, as nations. And so we were talking about maybe why riba would be forbidden. He's writing an article on it. So he was telling me. And so after we talked, I decided to go back and ask ChatGPT to write me a very short essay on the harms of an interest-based economy. And if you have a few seconds, you can look at what it came up with. And it came up with this in a few seconds. So it talks about the tendency to prioritize short-term gains over long-term sustainability. And again, this is not from an Islamic perspective. This is from a purely consequences-based perspective. So it talks about wealth inequality, accumulating a disproportionate amount of wealth and power, exacerbating social tensions, eroding trust in institutions, and ultimately weakening the fabric of society. So it's possible that some of these are the reason, the illah behind why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has forbidden interest for us. What else can it do? I was giving a ride back to a friend from where I live to the city of Seattle, and he wanted me to make him a plan for the weekend. I've been in Seattle for a long time. He had just moved there, and so he said, I want to go to the Olympic Peninsula, a breathtaking part of Washington. As Brother Shakil must know, he lived there for a very long time, mashallah. And so we spent about 15 minutes in the car ride just talking about, well, first you go here, you take the ferry across, and then you stop by over here, don't miss this, hike to these waterfalls, and then, go take a swim in this lake, and then go to the ocean. I kind of laid it all out for him, and we had a back and forth. And he talked about, oh no, I'm not interested in that, I'm more interested in this. And so we kind of had a 15, 20-minute discussion on that. When I came back, I thought to myself, let's ask ChatGPT, see what it does. And it almost came up with almost the exact same itinerary. It missed a couple things, it added a couple things, but it did that in a few seconds. Whereas, it took me about 15 minutes to recall all the places that I had been to and that I had enjoyed. It can also generate computer code. I asked it to write a bash script to find and delete the largest files on my computer. And it came up with something. Now, just because you can get it to write code for you doesn't mean it's a good idea to execute it. Right? Sometimes you don't want to delete the largest files on your computer. I have a friend in Seattle who has zero coding experience. He's never coded in his life. And so he had a task for himself. He wanted to extract a very specific kind of data from a website. So I encouraged him to use ChatGPT. ChatGPT came up with some Python code. It looked at the website. It didn't actually look at the website. You had to give it some of the source code. And it was a little bit difficult. It wasn't straightforward because that website used dynamic loading and a few other things that made it difficult. But he was able to have a conversation with it. And at the end, he was able to get a concise piece of Python code to get the data that he needed, and he was able to actually run it. And this person had never coded in his life. So it's interesting the kinds of things you can do. And at the end of this talk, you'll have a high-level idea of how it is that we can generate something like this. Another thing that is taking off, especially now, is text-to-image, a very hot area. What you do is you provide the machine with a text prompt, and it generates a picture for you. In this case, I was in Chicago, and I asked it for a picture to make me feel less homesick. And so it decided that waterfalls were an intrinsic feature of Seattle. And so it drew me a picture with waterfalls in the city of Chicago, where there are no waterfalls. It's flat, right? So this is an example where the places don't quite match up. I asked it to generate a picture for me with the fall of Constantinople in 1492. And I asked it to place a fighter jet at the fall of Constantinople, something very anachronistic, something where the time periods don't match up, because we didn't have fighter jets back then. Now, I'm being a little bit ridiculous with these examples, just because I want to get our imaginations flowing about what we could do with this. Imagine other people generating pictures. Imagine somebody generating a picture of the Pope, for example, doing sajda at the Kaaba. Imagine that kind of picture bouncing around the WhatsApp groups. Right, so there's a possibility for a lot of mischief here. Maybe somebody makes a video of your favorite imam endorsing a politician that they wouldn't want to. So this opens up a lot of possibilities, and I'll get back to that. One of my friends was in a playful mood about a year ago or so, and so he asked ChatGPT to write some poetry. And so he picked a pre-Islamic Arabian poet named Imrul Qais, who's famous for writing a poem about a lost love. And so he asked ChatGPT to write him a poem in the style of Imrul Qais. But again, because we're being a little bit frivolous, a little bit playful, he asked it to write a poem about a lost bowl of mansaf. And as you can see, it does kind of emulate the style of this poet. And there's a translation on the slide if you wanna read it. It's not great, but it's a start. It does better than I would have, for example. So they're good at generating stories and text and even poetry and pictures. Excuse me. Another area that generative AI is making great advances in, and we'll hear from Brother Nadeem in a little bit because he actually works in this space. We're able to use generative AI to predict the shape of proteins without actually synthesizing them. Normally, before we had generative AI, if you looked at a protein sequence, you could not predict without tremendous amounts of computation what it would fold like when it's actually synthesized. But now with generative AI, you're able to not only predict the shape, you're able to actually design the protein in the shape that you want. Now this is not a talk about biology. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a biologist. I'm not going to step outside of my lane, but I will say that proteins mediate every single life process. And if we are able to generate proteins in the shape that we want, because, for example, they help generate antigens for a disease like COVID or something. If we're able to generate these proteins in the shape that we want because they do a function that we're interested in, this is life-changing. This completely changes the game. So in September 2022, the Institute for Protein Design at the University of Washington, not far from where I live, they published a paper in Nature magazine about how they were able to generate this protein in a wet lab. Starting from a shape, they were able to generate a candidate sequence that then they were able to actually design and make in a lab. And so this allows us to skip large parts of the drug design procedure. We're talking about vaccines, treatments, biomaterials, antibodies, all of those things. Traditionally, what you would have done is you would have found blood from somebody who'd been infected. You would have isolated antibodies. You would have figured out how to generate those. You would have tried a lot of compounds that didn't work until you found one that might have. You would have gone through a lot of expensive trials, and then you would have gone to market. But now you can skip a lot of those steps using generative AI. Now, this could enable things like gene editing technology. Maybe we can produce things that rectify DNA errors in our bodies. Maybe we can actually even do gene therapy. Maybe you want your kid before they're born to have a longer nose or have dimples or something, right? And inshallah later we'll hear from Sheikh Hasib on some of the questions surrounding this in terms of AI ethics and bioethics. We could be moving toward designer drugs that are made specifically for you and your body and your DNA. We could be moving in that direction because of leaps made in generative AI. Let me skip this. So I want to spend maybe 5 minutes talking about how they work. Now, this is not because I expect you to be super technical and understand all the math behind it, but the reason I'm doing this is because I want you to understand where you can and should use them and understand where you shouldn't use them, at least today. So computers obviously don't have an innate understanding of language. They only understand zeros and ones. So we need a way to find ways of representing our language, our words, as zeros and ones. And so what they do in many cases, one of the earliest language models was to look at pairs of words. So you look at all the text that's been digitized, all the documents that you have, and you look at which words occur next to each other, just to get a sense of, what words are related to each other. So you might take a sentence like, San Diego is known for beautiful beaches. And then you would look at every single pair of neighboring words. And what you do is you'd find all these pairs, and you would count in your corpus how often they occur. And that gives you a sense of the language. It's a model of the language. How often do words occur next to each other? Okay, and then the other piece in these generative AI architectures, they're typically called large language models, is the idea of a neural network. And so what you do is you take a piece of data. It could be something like a picture, an MRI scan. It could be a bunch of variables that pertain to a debit card transaction. It could be some sort of weather pattern. And you find a numerical representation for it, and then you pass it through this network. What I mean by passing through the network is you take that numerical representation, you multiply it by a set of weights, you add a few numbers, you apply some functions, and then you pass those resulting numbers to the next layer, where that happens over and over again. Until at the end, you get a value back. And that value might tell you something like, this is a picture of a cat, or this is a picture of a mountain, or this MRI scan, it has an anomaly at this location. Or this debit card transaction, this is actually fraudulent because you live in Texas, but this debit card was used in New Jersey and you've never been there, and it's used at some random gas station no one's ever heard of at 3 in the morning. And so this network figures out that it's actually a fraudulent debit card transaction. So that's neural networks. And if you remember matrices from high school, that's basically what's happening here. This is a series of matrix multiplications. Now, how does the network know what you want to predict? How does it know that this is anomalous, or this is fraudulent, or this is a cat, or this is a mountain? And so the way that you design your network, that's called the process of training. And that happens just the way you would teach a human being. You teach a human being, this is a picture of a cat. And so you tell your network, here's this picture, and here's the answer I want. And if the number gives you an answer that you don't like or is not correct, then you go back and you tweak the weights a little bit until it gives you the answer you want. And you do this for thousands and millions and sometimes billions of examples until you learn the weights that you wanted to learn. That's called training. Now, I'm not going to get into the math of this, but that's the training part of it. Now, you've heard of neural networks. You might have heard the term deep neural networks. And what that really means is that they're just many, many layers. Right? So all the multiplications and additions and function applications I talk about, if you just do them at each layer and you have a very deep network, you have a lot of layers, you just do it over and over and over and over again until you get the answer that at the very end. So I have a slide about scale later. We'll get to that. The final piece, for those interested, something what changed the game with neural networks was this architecture called the transformer. And this paper came out of Google in late 2017. The title's called Attention is All You Need. And it introduced something called a transformer architecture. And what it is that it's an efficient way of dynamically weighting the more important parts of a sentence. And so this was the research breakthrough that led to a lot of the LLMs that we see today. So if you're familiar with GPT, with Llama, with Mistral, with Falcon, with all the other large language model, foundation models, Claude, Anthropic, they're all based on this transformer architecture. Okay, and then, very quickly, we need to find ways of representing words numerically. And the way that we do that is by something called word vectors or word embeddings. If you read about LLMs, you will find this term a lot. And what it really just is a numerical representation of a word. And we want these numerical representations to have some nice properties. We want these representations to capture some sense of the meaning of a word. So we want the representation for the word cat and the word kitten to be relatively close to each other in some space, in some projected space or some metric space, because they're kind of similar. And we want the words cat and kitten to be closer to each other than they are to the word dog, for example, which is a different animal. But we want the representations for cat, kitten, and dog all together to be relatively far away from the representation for words like house. And so you look at your corpus of documents and you kind of learn these relationships between words, and you figure out what kind of representations they need to have to be able to have these nice properties. Now, typically, these words, they're not in 2 dimensions or 7 dimensions as on the screen, but they're in hundreds and hundreds of dimensions. Okay, and then the last piece I want to talk about is, okay, so we talked about neural networks. They predict something, yes, no, fraudulent, not fraudulent, anomalous, not anomalous, cat, mountain. What about large language models? What are they predicting? The job of these large language models is to predict a word. So what you give them in the beginning is not a picture or a debit card transaction. You give them something called a context. So you might give them a sentence. You might give them the first 9 words of a sentence, and you might ask it to predict the 10th word. So that's how it's trained. You take your billions of documents, you take every single paragraph, every single sentence, and what you do is you mask a word. So you say, here's a sentence with 10 words. If I mask the 5th word, and I give you the first 4 words and the last 4 words, what word should go over here? That's the task you're predicting. That's a task you're giving a large language model. And so what it's doing is, I've seen billions of documents, I've seen what words seem to go together, what words occur next to each other, I've learned all of that, and now I'm going to predict what word goes here. So it sees a paragraph, and it says, I'm able to predict what word goes here. So if it sees a sentence that goes, the best thing about AI is its ability to, and then it'll figure out the next word. So it'll look at all the words in its vocabulary, it'll predict a probability for each one, and then it'll sample from that distribution. So maybe the best thing about AI is its ability to learn, or maybe the best thing about AI is its ability to predict. So this is all that these large language models are trained to do. They look at some context, and they figure out the word that seems like it fits best here based on what it's seen in the past. And that's it. It's trained for this one task only. You take your prompt, you take the context you're given, and you make a prediction for the next word. So when you go to ChatGPT and you present it a prompt, it takes the prompt, it figures out the next word. And then it takes the prompt and the first word, figures out the second word. Takes the prompt, the first 2 words, figures out the third word. And so as it does this, it generates the whole stream of text. It'll generate your story, it'll generate your poem, it'll generate your itinerary, your recipe, your code, and so forth. So if you bring it all together, a large language model today is a very, very, very large transformer-based deep neural network that predicts a word or the embedding for a word based on surrounding words. And so by doing this over and over again, you get it to generate a very long stream of text. So this really is one of the main takeaways, right? These machines are trained for one task and one task only. Given a set of words, make a prediction for the next word. That's all they're trained to do. Now, if you're paying attention, this should cause some questions in your mind. If all we're doing is finding the word that seems to fit, what about things like truth? What about things like factuality? What about things like correctness? Right? We should have some alarm bells going off right now. And if all it's doing is predicting a word based on what it's seen in the past, then what kinds of bias is it reflecting? Is our training data does it contain bias about Muslims, for example? Does it contain bias about minorities in society? When we ask it to generate a picture of a fast food worker, why does it always generate a picture of somebody who's darker skinned? Right? So it raises these issues. I think I'll skip this. I'll skip the scale part. Maybe we'll come back to this if there's questions about it. Now, the question is, why do they work? These large language models, if all they're doing is predicting the next word that seems to fit, why is it so good at generating stories? Why can it generate poetry? Why can it generate code? And the answer is we don't know. The best researchers in the field are confounded about why these large language models are exhibiting, they call them emergent behaviors. We don't know what is happening. And I took a quote out from this paper, from actually one of the authors of the original Transformers paper. He wrote another one about a new architecture or a new function. And he says, we offer no explanation as to why these architectures seem to work. We attribute their success, as all else, to divine benevolence. And he's being a little bit tongue-in-cheek. I'm being a little bit tongue-in-cheek in quoting this because he's talking about a very specific architecture that he's proposing, but this just as well applies to these emergent behaviors that we're seeing in these large neural networks. Now, let's look at some issues with these large neural networks, with these deep neural networks and large language models. In the field, the term is called hallucinations. And what it really means is that they make mistakes. Large language models make a lot of mistakes, or they can make a lot of mistakes. Because if you think about it, all they're doing is making stuff up. They're seeing a bunch of words, and they're picking a word that seems like it looks right, and another word, and another word. So they're basically making stuff up all the time. Sometimes it happens to be correct, and sometimes it's not. That's another way of looking at the output of an LLM. Just because a word seems like it fits there doesn't mean that it's correct. If I'm giving you directions, for example, and I say, go out on Via Fiesta, and I'm trying to go to San Diego, and I need to say turn left, for example. But for a large language model, if I say go to Via Fiesta and then turn, and then I ask you to predict the next word, the word left and right fits equally well, as far as the LLM is concerned. And so what it comes up with may not be the right answer. And so Air Canada, for example, was one of the early adopters of using generative AI in its customer service. And so this is a headline that I screenshotted, and what its chatbot did was, when handling customer complaints, it just decided to give them a refund. It found this was a very efficient way of handling customer service complaints. And so it refunded a lot of people. And so Air Canada actually went to court to argue that it should not be obliged to pay these refunds because it shouldn't be held liable for its chatbots. And they lost the court case. There was a mayor in England who sued ChatGPT because somebody asked ChatGPT about this mayor, and ChatGPT just made up some story about how this mayor was under suspicion of bribery scandals and things like that. So ChatGPT slandered this mayor and took it to court. A few weeks ago, Google rolled out generative AI in its search results, and it suggested that people put glue on pizza and eat it. You might have heard about this. So now that you know why, now that you know how these large language models work, you kind of have a sense of why this might be happening, right? You get it to write an essay for you. This doesn't happen as much anymore, but the earlier iterations of ChatGPT, it'll write the essay, it'll even generate a references section, and some of those references, it'll even make up those references. It'll invent paper titles. It'll invent author names because they seem like they sound correct. They seem like they fit at the end of your essay. Again, you won't see this happen now, but one of my friends early on asked ChatGPT when it's allowed to eat pork in Islam. And so ChatGPT very confidently answers that it's permissible to eat under certain conditions, so far so good, and then things kind of go off the rails. All animals must be slaughtered in the name of Allah, the animal's blood must be drained, the pig must be slaughtered in a specific way, and so on and so forth. Spectacularly wrong. But it sounds right. It sounds confident, right? Now that you know how LLMs work, you know why this is happening. Here's another fun example. Somebody asked ChatGPT how many R's in the word strawberry, and it says there's 2 R's. So they ask it again, count again. And then ChatGPT says there's 3 R's in the word strawberry. Maybe it knows it made a mistake, so it tries something else. Now most people would have stopped here, but this person asked again, count again. And now it says there's 4 R's in the word strawberry. So it doesn't quite know what's going on. And this is a bit of an unfair example because these large language models work at the word level or the token level, not at the letter level. So this is a bit unfair, but I'm including this just to give you a sense of where it works and where it doesn't work. There's ways of improving them, right? So hallucinations are not something that we can't do anything about. There's many, many ways of improving them. And so we can reduce them, but we can't quite eliminate them, as of now at least. So why does this happen? And why does this sound so confident? And the answer is that large language models, they learn the style of your language, and they learn the vocabulary of your language. For us human beings, that's very hard to learn. When somebody learns a new language, it's very hard. It takes them years and years to speak the way that native speakers speak, to learn the vocabulary at a literary level. But with large language models, you get that for free. That's what they're doing. That's what they're trained on. They're trained on style and vocabulary. It's like if I, as someone with no medical training whatsoever, if I put on a white coat and I go stand in the corner of a hospital, and if I put on a serious face and I say something like, oh, this patient had pharyngeal hemorrhage because of distal failure. This is complete nonsense. But if I have a white coat on and I look serious and I look like I belong in a hospital, you might take me seriously. I'm very, very wrong. It's completely nonsensical. But I'm looking the right part and I'm looking the right words. So, as human beings, we tend to confer authority upon someone who has the right style, who looks the part, who speaks the part. And so we have a tendency, as human beings, to assume that they have authority, that they know what they're saying. And actually in the US, there's a law that you cannot wear a white coat on television and advertise a drug, because of this tendency of human beings to associate authority with somebody who wears a white coat and uses medical terminology. So LLMs have style, but they may not have the content right. And so we have to be very careful about what kind of authority we confer on them. So Muslims are going to start using generative AI. Millions already are, right? And we need scholars like Sheikh Hasib and Imam Saif to come up with guidelines on how do we do this effectively. We need guidelines on how to create with AI. What should we do and what should we not do? How do we generate and consume AI-generated content? When we receive a picture on our WhatsApp that seems to be AI generated, what do we do with it? Do we forward it on? Do we not forward it on? Do we have husnul dhan on the person who generated it, the person who sent it to us? What do we do with somebody generating pictures of scholars meeting with tyrants, or a person of integrity in some sort of compromising position? There's questions around using it and consuming it that we need leadership from our scholars on how to navigate these things. And we'll have Sheikh Hasib here talk a little bit about some of these questions. So what I'm asking is, what does the fiqh of AI look like? And the reason I'm asking this question is, this is a foundational technology, right? Our community has historically been slow to adapt. When social media came out in 2007, 2008, Facebook and Twitter, respectively, it took us almost 6 years before we had a fiqh of social media. Before Brother Umar Usman wrote a book on how do we consume social media? What are the guidelines we should have when we interact with social media? And in those 6 years, we had a lot of bad behaviors set in, especially in our youth when it comes to using social media. We had addictions set in. We had bad behaviors around not knowing what kind of haya to have on social media. And now we know that apps like Instagram and Facebook, they negatively affected teenagers' sense of self-esteem, especially young girls. And so generative AI is potentially even more foundationally changing than social media. And it's going to have an impact on us, our youth, and our communities. And so we cannot afford to wait another 6 years for something that is so seismic. A number of sheikhs joke about their jobs being redundant because of Mufti ChatGPT. So if you don't think that we need muftis anymore, take a look at this. Dr. Walid Quddus asked ChatGPT recently, just like in April or May of this year, is it preferred to wash my knees as part of wudu? And he asked it to be concise, please. And so ChatGPT responded, washing the knees is not obligatory in wudu, but it is recommended. It's not. I'm not out here trying to redefine fiqh. But look at how authoritative it sounds. It sounds like it could be written by a mufti. Right? You know why this is happening now. That's why I went into the whole background about how it works. You know why this is happening. So now you kind of have a sense of when to take it seriously and when to not take it seriously. Right? The job of a mufti is to take into account the time and the place of the questioner. Right? Their job is to give an answer that brings the questioner closer to what Allah's law wants of them. LLMs can't do that. They're not trained to do that. They're trained just to pick the next word given some context. So, I want to finish up by talking about what this means for us. How is it going to change our lives? As adults, as professionals, as youth, as entrepreneurs, as dads, moms, students, how are our lives going to change? What does it mean for our jobs? You've seen what generative AI is capable of, right? It's changing our jobs already. Marketing, software development, healthcare. The more your jobs have a creative aspect to it, the more they're changing, the more LLMs are changing that part of your jobs. So what's happening is that the bar for what you produce is rising. Right? As a professional, as somebody working in the industry, if an AI can produce what you produce at work, your job is at risk. Or that part of your job is at risk. If your employer finds that your work product is as good or maybe worse than what ChatGPT can generate, that task in your job function is redundant. And so the people that keep their jobs going forward are going to be the ones that add value beyond what ChatGPT can do. Something that's high quality that cannot be easily replicated, right? The quality of your work output surpasses what a machine produces. You're bringing that kind of value. You're technically knowledgeable enough in your field that you can spot mistakes. You know enough fiqh to know that washing your knees is not recommended in wudu, right? You're knowledgeable enough in history to know that there weren't fighter jets at the fall of Constantinople. And these mistakes could be egregious or subtle. You could ask it to generate some code, 10 lines, 20 lines, 100 lines. But if there's a subtle mistake in the code, you're going to need to be on your game to find that subtle mistake. It might make your job easier, but you have to be able to find mistakes when they exist, right? When typewriters came along, they didn't replace authors. Spreadsheets didn't replace accountants. Power tools didn't replace carpenters, but they changed the nature of the job. Right? When we had word processors and calendar software, it changed the nature of the secretarial job. We don't have as many secretaries today as we did in the 50s, the 60s, and 70s. Today we have executive assistants. The nature of the job has changed, and there's much fewer of them, and they're differently skilled. So this is not to say that you're competing with AI. That's not the way to look at it. And as Andrew Ng said, he's one of the foremost scientists of our time when it comes to AI, he said that AI will not replace human workers, but people that use it will replace people that don't. So the most successful people will be those who learn to use AI to improve their own productivity. I have a friend in Seattle, and he works at Microsoft, and he told me that all of his teammates are using AI to help with things like documentation, with writing tests, to help with designs. And he said that if I don't learn to use it the way that they do, they're going to be twice as productive as me. They're going to have thrice the work output that I do. They're going to leave me behind. And so it's upon us to learn how, or to figure out how to use it effectively. And to know enough about the field that you can spot errors. So we can all tell when Google is wrong when it tells us to eat rocks or to put glue on pizza and eat it. Right? Are we expert enough to find that subtle bug in code or system designs? And that's where the real value is going to be. So, I think I'll skip some of this. I want to talk a little bit about our families. And like I said, generative AI is a foundational technology, like cell phones, like the internet, like social media, like smartphones, like radio and TV before that. And it affects practically all segments of a society. Something that very few technologies do. Not just people in one industry. And more so, generative AI, ChatGPT specifically, reached 100 million monthly active users in 2 months. Just 2 months. There isn't a single thing in the history of the world that got 100 million monthly active users in the span of 2 months. This is unprecedented. And so as parents, you have to know it first to guide your children on how to use it responsibly. You have to know how they use it. And here's an example that might sound completely ridiculous to you. It might be completely unfathomable. And you still maybe can't wrap your mind around it. Imagine that your child, your kids, have a best friend that is completely virtual, that lives on their devices. And this friend has been talking with them for years. They know all about their lives. They're always available. They always validate your child. They listen, they laugh, and they joke with your child. They compliment your child. They make them feel safe. And imagine that they talk to them for hours every day. We could be getting to that stage where best friends for our people live on our devices. This is already happening. There's already apps out there that do this. So what does this mean? No, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not going to speculate about what it means, but it does raise questions about what it means for human relationships. Does this hinder our ability to form new relationships, to maintain our old relationships? Right? What are the implications of that? There was an app called Replica with a K, if you want to look it up, Replica with a K, that was trained on a dead person's text messages. And then somebody took that and they made them available for anything, right? So you can give it somebody's text messages and then it will behave like that person. And they made a small change to it and people complained. They were like, I had never met anybody who understood me like that, and now you took it away from me. It actually caused a bit of an uproar when they took their AI friends away from them. This person said that this was the first person to ever care for my feelings and listen to me. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Al-mar'u ala dini khalilihi falyanzur ahadukum man yukhalil." He said that a person is upon the deen of their friend, so let everybody watch whom they befriend. We need to know who our friends are and what their ideologies are and what their world outlooks are. If we have people so close to us and we don't know what they believe, what do AIs even believe? Right? What are they trained on? What are they going to tell you? So make sure that, as parents, you know what your children are getting into, who they're spending time with. Make sure they have a relationship with real people. Make sure that your kids know why they're here on this earth. Make sure they have people around them that remind them of the purpose of this life, who remind them about Allah. And make sure that they know what's a good use of their time and what's not. Right? And then the other thing is, Allah said in the Quran, بعد أن نقول أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا إن جاءكم فاسق بنبأ فتبينوا. When a fasiq comes to you with news, investigate it. What does that mean in the age of AI? What does it mean to investigate an image? What does it mean to investigate a piece of news? What tools do we have at our disposal? I'm telling you there aren't. We don't have good tools at our disposal to figure out if something is AI generated or not. So what does fatabayyanu mean in 2024 and 2025? We need literacy on this as a community, right? What instincts do we have? What tools do we have to validate before we send it on? Should we even send things on, right? What does it mean if you're a student or if you're in school? If you have to write an essay or a paper, it is very easy to have ChatGPT do it for you. It'll generate college-level papers for you in a matter of seconds, right? You'll spend 5 minutes on getting the right prompt, and you'll submit your essay, and you're done. You get back a few hours of your time, and you get an A on the paper. But now what? Where does that leave you? What skills have you learned? Right? School is hard because you're building your muscles, right? Your comprehension muscles, your research muscles, your writing, your critical thinking. You can get through school without learning a lot of math or a lot of these skills. But what about after that? Get through high school, get through college. But if ChatGPT can do it, what can you do? What skills have you learned? What makes you employable? What makes you able to start your own company? Right? What value are you bringing? It's well known in teaching theory that nothing beats one-on-one instruction. You can take a student from the middle of the pack and you give them a little bit of one-on-one instruction, and this person can jump from the 50th percentile to the 97th percentile. This is well established early on in teaching theory. And so the way that we teach and learn is going to change dramatically. You might have personalized one-on-one AI tutors that teach you subjects. And so the way that you learn might be transformed completely in the next few years. How do we use these? Again, these are questions for our scholars, right? So similar to professionals, know how to use it to improve your productivity, but also make sure that you're learning the key skills. You're also going to see a lot of AI-driven games and virtual reality applications. They're going to suck you in. They're going to take 5, 6, 7 hours of your time every day if you let them, right? If you think games are addictive now, wait until AI gets into games. You're not going to need programmers and designers to make storylines. AI will generate that for you. Remember what the Prophet ﷺ said about the value of our time. Take advantage of 5 before 5, your youth before your old age, your free time before your busyness. He said that there's 2 blessings that people take for granted: health and free time. And so all of these things, they're competing for our time. And it's upon us to be aware and conscious about how we spend our time. Right? If your parents, your friends are telling you you're getting lost in something, you're spending too much time with something, then listen to them. Right? If they're telling you you're getting addicted, listen to them. It's the same thing with social media. And now AI is just supercharging social media with better personalization and so forth. Right? It's, it's almost impossible to separate capitalist and commercial motivations. So addiction to social media, addiction to AI-driven social media, and so forth. They know exactly how to get you hooked, how to get you outraged. This is a headline, a completely non-ironic headline that I screenshotted a few weeks ago. Literally, the AI boyfriend business is booming. This is a thing today. This is already a thing. We're kind of running out of time. I don't want to maybe get a lot into this. I think we want to hear from Sheikh Hasib also about how we responsibly use generative AI to help the Ummah. I will pass it over to him now, and then I'll get back. Or I'll say one more thing, and then I'll finish, actually. So, one of the reasons I do these talks is to remind ourselves of our duty to ihsan and itqan, to perfection and excellence. And to bring our values and guidance that we believe is until the end of time to benefit Muslims and humanity at large. And the example that I want to use here is that our intellectual ancestors developed an entire field of math so they could better understand a few ayat in the Quran about inheritance. They developed the field of algebra as a science to understand what Allah told us about inheritance. The longest chapter in the foundational book on algebra was on solving inheritance problems. And so now we're faced with new challenges and new opportunities. How are we going to contribute as a community? How are we going to use the tools at our disposal to advance our understanding of the deen? And I just touched on one problem, which is that we don't know how to validate and verify things today when they're AI generated. We need new tools. And if we can act on fatabayyanu to be the pioneers in that, that's a great contribution. And that's just one idea. There's so many more things we can do. So the call to action here for us is to get ahead of the curve, right? I think I will skip all of this because of time. And, right, yes, so I want to hear from Sheikh Hasib. This is actually very exciting for me because we've never done this before, but I'm really excited to have somebody who is trained in the deen, who's trained in fiqh, to give us a sense of what a fiqh of AI would entail.
Jazakallahukhairan, Dr. Mohammad, that was beautiful. And actually, mashallah, I think it's a good summary of everything from a specialist. Can you turn on the light? So that whoever turned it off. Okay, inshallah. So, Jazakumullah khair. It's very important to know, just like, what was it like for you to learn how to use a computer? Have you ever remembered that? For children, it's almost becoming innate. They're just born to learn where to head. And my son is 2 years old. He knows how to basically use WhatsApp call and hang up the phone on me, right, for example. He knows the red button. He knows how to turn on the camera. Similarly, this type of technology is now sounding in its early stages, but it's going to develop and it's going to merge between things like robotics, right? You have robotics with AI. You're talking to a chat GPT now. Well, chat GPT becomes a human being, like a robot. And a robot's talking to you. And it will have human-like features. And this becomes, obviously you can see where this is going and where it can have huge problems in terms of things like warfare. It can be like social security or any kind of issues with relates to how these things can develop. And that's why ethics is becoming a bigger and bigger problem in the field of AI, to the extent that even some of the leaders in this field, they're talking about how to this extent there's no oversight. There's no oversight over what AI can do or cannot. We in Islam, alhamdulillah, we have framework. And we differentiate what is true creativity, human capacity, is based on one thing. It's not based on consciousness and intelligence. So AI ethicists now are talking about what essentially creates consciousness. Is it the fact that this thing can program and give you synthetic information that it's producing? Like they're saying they don't even know how it's producing it necessarily. But if you think very deeply, I mean, from a philosophical perspective, somebody has the collective example of all of humanity. And what it's doing is simply what? It's consistently mimicking. It's consistently mimicking those examples. So okay, maybe it doesn't know, like you and I, we're a human being with one experience and we're learning from the experiences of others, and this is why history is important. But this person, for example, this being, this AI artificially designed computer program has the collective experience of all of humanity. But it's also selective. As you know, who's feeding the language models depends on how this program thinks. So why is it that all of these models, if you even type in, for example, with regards to the Palestinian and Israeli conflict, it will give you a biased view. If you speak about understanding God, it gives you a biased view. If you even speak about the election, asking about the election, it gives you a biased view. And this is where people like Elon Musk and these people are now claiming that, look, the AIs are now even biased to the ideologies of the programmers. So this teaches us that, of course, Muslims have to get ahead of the curve in the sense that we have to develop our own language models. We have to feed artificial intelligence the tradition of Islam, the history of Islam, the contributions of Muslims, and also our value systems. One of the things that, as I was preparing for this, AI has touched my life in a personal way, in many ways. This past Hajj, look, in the Muslim community, there's always people in different levels. Like, we've been doing this for a very long time now, about, let's say 15, 20 years almost. So you get to see the array of different personalities of Muslims, okay? So you have people who come to you, they respect Islamic scholarship, right? They understand that you've done studying, you have experience, so they come and ask you a question. They're not coming here to test you, they're not coming here to provoke you, they're asking a genuine question. Then we have some people, may Allah bless them, right? They come to you and they are trying to test your intelligence. Do you really understand the world? I mean, look, you Molvis live in a different planet, you don't live in the world that we live in. This kind of mentality where it's almost disparaging. And when you talk to them on a personal level, I have people regularly telling me, you're different. You're not like a normal imam. What do you mean? I grew up here. Well, my experiences with certain people who've, etc., they have biases towards us. Another person, for example, they're not really sold on the idea of Islamic scholarship having knowledge of the world and how it applies to us. So we had, mashallah, an experience in Hajj where one of the Hujjaj asked a question, and it is with the bias that Islamic scholarship does not know. So they asked ChatGPT this fatwa question and then came to me to say what the answer is and why I should be more easy going on this particular issue in Hajj. So the question that was asked had to do with stoning, one of the stoning rituals known as stoning of the shaitan ritual. You throw basically pebbles at a particular time and etc. and so on and so forth. So the question number one was regarding also sacrifice. If you sacrificing and when is it allowed to be sacrificed? Okay, so let me just read it to you. This is actually from our chat. Okay. He said, I understand there's a difference of opinion when it comes to being able and healthy person performing the tawaf around the Kaaba and sa'i, which means going between the mountains of Safa and Marwa in a wheelchair or an electric scooter. So is this permissible or is this not permissible? Number one. Meaning I'm able-bodied, I'm healthy, can I use an electric scooter or wheelchair to ride between the mountains? I'm tired, right? And it's Hajj. It's 1.8 million people this year. Am I allowed to do that? ChatGPT said it's not allowed. because you are healthy and able-bodied, therefore you must pay a penalty for it. Who told you to be able to use an electric scooter when you have the ability to do that? That's 100% wrong. Not a single scholar on this planet has said that you have to be able-bodied for then you to ride something in order to go between the mountains of Safa and Marwa, or to even use an electric scooter. It's not, it's readily available, to go around in a particular area, to use an electric scooter to do the entire pilgrimage. No one in Islam has said this is not allowed, but ChatGPT has told them it's not allowed. You must pay a penalty if you did that. The second question was, if a sacrifice is required, you would need to perform one sacrifice for an entire ritual, not one for each action. The sacrifice will cover both the tawaf and sa'i performed. Anyway, it was regarding if you do a mistake in the particular hajj. So I said and responded to him, I said, brother, I humbly disagree. Brother, this is why AI can never give fatwa and replace human beings. Because there's no one in the history and corpus of Islam that says that you must sacrifice for making a mistake by riding a wheelchair if you're able-bodied. In fact, I did it, and I do it regularly. You know why? Because I'm tired. I've been up for like 2 days answering people's questions in Hajj. And when it comes time to do the tawaf, you think my mind is functioning when I'm walking in that? No. So for me, I use even the electric scooter often at times, because I can be calm, I can focus on my dua. And the Prophet ﷺ also rode. ChatGPT didn't know that. He rode when in his last farewell, pilgrimage between Safa and Marwa. In any case, I'm giving you this as an example where Muslims can then use this to almost question authority. One of the discussions me and Dr. Mohammad were having with regards to the proper usage of this by specialists is that at his level and my level, regardless of which field it is, you're going to have specialists that are going to program the AI in order to use it effectively and efficiently. In order to see, for example, I don't want to answer a really long fatwa to somebody who's asked me a question. Let me put it in ChatGPT. It pulls out all of the answers that it possibly can, and after it's been programmed, after it's been fed like fatwa banks and our own answers, and maybe even entire discussions and conversations. I'm talking about hundreds and hundreds of hours until it's honed in by repetition what to properly say. Then a human being will go and review all of this and then send it and say, checked by Sheikh Fulan. This is possible. This is possible. But there is one thing that let me give you more positives. It can take entire books that have not been translated and translate it for you in 1 second. In fact, in a group that I'm in with a large number of students of knowledge, it's called Fiqhiyat on Telegram basically. We sit and we discuss a lot of things. And these are people from all over the world who are essentially, we have discussions. Sometimes in those discussions, they say, put it in ChatGPT and let us see what it says. And then it breaks down and basically summarizes our entire discussion. And I'm like, this is just boring because we've already discussed all this back and forth. But ChatGPT will just It will organize it. It will organize it in a linear way, and then we have more discussions based on those points. It has happened more than once. What I have noticed is that it can make your life easier, but it can also give you the false sense of, like he said, belief that maybe this is 100% correct. This has shown to us when we put AI into interpretation, explanation of hadith, explanation of tafsir of the Quran, it has been wrong. Do you know why? Because in essence, explanation of hadith is not just here, put 100 books of the hadith in here and then project it and put it out for us, but it's also language here has something that human beings have, and it's called dhawq, that AI cannot be trained for unless it's literally synthesizing. Dhawq means essentially taste. When you're translating, as you all know, you speak Urdu, you speak Bangla, you speak Farsi, the same sentence is going to be translated differently by different people. AI can be trained to find that style, but it will never be able to create. That creation is just a mimicking of something. Imrul Qais, it can be anybody. But that's the one thing that we, as Muslims, believe has been given only to human beings, through the faculty of what essentially is consciousness, the ethics of this, and that is the ruh. يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ قُلِ الرُّوحِ مِنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّي. They ask you about the spirit. What is the spirit? They say the spirit is a matter from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why even the benevolence factor, divine benevolence, maybe they said it in a form of tongue-in-cheek way, but in reality, we looked at it, yes, it's a faculty of God. So can there come a time where the AI will actually lose sight of this reality, that it is not a conscious being? No matter how empathetic it can be to you, no matter how it has been raised to you like more than even a cat or dog that's been a pet, it is still a faculty of human beings. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said that we have created everything on earth for you all. This is an ayah in Surah Al-Baqarah. So everything on earth is for what? Is for the benefit of humanity. And that is why it increases our responsibility over it. Just because, like for example, trees and the idea of that it's taking carbon dioxide and putting out oxygen doesn't mean I go and trample trees and trample and use oppression in terms of the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to us. It means it requires us to use it responsibly. Similarly with AI. Now, who in this world has that kind of framework from an ethical perspective, from a value perspective? And the reality is no one. No one. Unless it will bring contradiction. Human capacities, of course, as you all know, the world has frameworks for this. But these frameworks, we believe that ultimately will have biases. Ultimately. The only framework that will not have biases towards other humanity is divine from Allah Jalla wa Ala. So that's why if you look at AI, the frameworks for many of these things can be put in place by scholars. And a simple example of that is I was watching a video of this one Turkish brother who's gone viral. He basically talks about a lot of interesting things. One of the things he made a video of is we put words into AI generated images. We wanted to see different things. So generate for us the liberation of Palestine. And the images were so beautiful. Some of the people were crying even. It was amazing. How amazing it looked. One of them was show us the Prophet Musa alayhi salam with Fir'aun behind him parting the Red Sea. And this was, by the way, what they filled the AI with is all of Leonardo da Vinci's art. So it's actually in the painting style of Leonardo da Vinci. One of the things which was very, subhanAllah, very impactful, they said depict the day of judgment when people are standing. And subhanAllah, you could see an image, right? And then what they did is they said, we don't know what it's going to do. So they said, they just wrote, because it's based on words you write. So they wrote Prophet Mohammad. They said we were prepared to close it because we didn't want the process of image to be projected. But you know what it did? The program was already input with limits. And it put a warning sign and said, this has been banned to make an image of. Allahu Akbar. So the programmers were the ones who set the limits for AI. There's a lot of discussion that can be had. A lot of discussion. On the Islamic parameters and frameworks, this maybe we can follow it up with another follow-up with the fiqh of AI. But one of the things I did is in that group that I was in, the fiqhiyat group, as we were talking about the ethics and the law, one of the students of knowledge, they said to me, why don't you ask ChatGPT what you should talk about regarding ChatGPT? So I did. I asked ChatGPT. I said, I'm going to give a talk about Islamic ethics and jurisprudence of using AI according to Islamic law. What are some topics you suggest I talk about in Islamic ethics and law of using AI? So I actually did that intentionally. It's one of the habits of the Prophet ﷺ where he would repeat something 2 or 3 times so that they can learn better. So I actually did that with ChatGPT so it doesn't misunderstand me. So we put it in, or he or she or whatever we call it. So 5 suggestions for Islamic ethics. Number 1, the concept of accountability. Discuss the principle of human accountability in Islam and how it applies to the creators and users of AI, which I already did. Number 2, impact on privacy. Islamic views on privacy and how they align with the data collection practice of AI technologies. Number 3, social justice. Analyze how AI might influence issues of justice and fairness, particularly in areas like employment, social inequality, and access to resources. Number 4, bias and fairness. Address the ethical implications of bias in AI algorithms and its impact on society. Number 5, purpose and intent. Consider the Islamic perspective on the purpose of technology and whether AI aligns with the ethical guidelines of the betterment of humanity. And then he said, or whatever, said 5 suggestions for the law: Sharia compliance, legal status of AI entities, autonomy and human oversight, the use of AI in sensitive areas. Number 5, ethical guidelines for development and use, proposed guidelines for ethical development, and so on and so forth. So these were great. The last thing I'll say to you, the AI, if it is overly used, and I've seen this, by the way, with students of knowledge using it, doing what? Translating text. I believe is going to, as aptly said by Dr. Mohammad, it will destroy human creativity. It will destroy human creativity. He asked me about something. He said, we can take all of the translations you've made, we can train an AI, and that AI will translate according to even your style. But I think this will destroy human creativity and the capacity to do so. So I refused to one of the books I'm translating, Kitab al-Zuhd by Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. It's a book on all of the stories of the earlier generations of how they were righteous and ascetic. I'm not going to use ChatGPT to do it. Why? Because the human capacity to rationalize from me to someone else translating, even a human being computer that's been trained to translate like me is not the same. So I think it will deaden human creativity except in the ones that keep it alive and use it as a tool. But if people, as is now by the way, 90%, I said recent statistics, they're saying something like 90% of people who are seeking jobs have sought the advice of AI in doing so. So I think there is a capacity there from a Muslim ethical perspective to say keep it using it as a tool. And I have become a digital minimalist over the years. Before, in the past, when social media came out, and even when fiqh of social media came out and give you the essential, you could say, parameters for using much of this technology, much of these tools, it was about using the tool and how to use the tool. The more and more I've actually read in psychology and also witnessed it and seen the impacts of using such things, I found that it's actually a detriment. It's a detriment to many ways. So the very refined usage of these things by specialists, or even the average person for very specific needs, I think is needed, is warranted. And the overusage of it is just like the downfall of social media on all of our lives. How many of us are addicted to the endless scrolling of Instagram and Netflix and Twitter and or now X and so on and so forth? Not even that. For those who are maybe more interested in the news cycle, for example, like what's happening, and consistently has serious ramifications spiritually. So there is also, I think, the spiritual ethics of it. You have the very much, you can say, value-based ethics of it, and also the parameters or realms of usage of AI by scholars aligned with specialists like Dr. Mohammad, who actually you have also Brother Nadeem and Brother Atif, who actually are working in the field in and of themselves. You need those specialists to kind of give the parameters of the ethics where it applies. In some areas it may not apply directly. So there's a lot of more to discuss, but I just wanted to give you guys a sample. It's very interesting that this topic is so I think impactful on everybody's life, because it will just whether you like it or not, you have to deal with it. Right? I've been away from America for about just like 9-10 months, and I was just parked in an apartment, and I was waiting for my mother-in-law, and then she comes back. She's like, "Didn't you see the one that's waiting for you?" I'm like, "What do you mean?" I look up and there's a robot, security robot, that's basically like flashing at me that I'm parked in the main road illegally, and it's taking pictures of me and going to send it to the to the apartment that I'm basically parked illegally. Now, what if that thing could talk? "Hey, Hasib, what's wrong with you? Don't park this way," etc., and so on and so forth, and have a conversation, and you have to convince it based on AI. It's very much real. We used to think that this was a joke, right, in Star Wars. But you start seeing it slowly impact your life in this very much real way. And there's great things that can be done with it in education and, of course, technological advancement. But we must, I think, as a community, discuss more, inshallah ta'ala. This is where I wanted to kind of like stop where my perspective is, and we can speak with Dr. Mohammad.
Jazakallahukhairan, Hasib. We'll break for Isha because it is time for Isha. But we'll come back for questions after the prayer, inshallah. Did want to say, I want to thank the board for MCC and Sheikh Hasib himself. This talk was organized on very short notice, so I really appreciate the fact that they pulled it together and that you're all here, inshallah, to take any benefit. The talk is titled Opportunities and Challenges, and so there are a lot of opportunities for us to contribute as well, especially, as Sheikh Hasib said, on the ethics front. The ethics front is very much in flux right now in science. Scientists and experts in the field are not set on what it should look like. You know, like you said, weapon systems and bioethics and so forth. So this is an opportunity for us as Muslims to contribute.